What's up, live audience? I love a live audience. Today, we are going to be talking about getting out of the sagittal plane in your training. So how to incorporate more rotational work, more side-to-side work, when it's good, when it's not, how often to do it, how to load it. This is a topic I especially enjoy talking about because it's a topic that we've been talking about for a long time, and now people are starting to kind of come around and realize that it's important. So what I would love to hear from you guys is how many of you are familiar with the various planes of motion? Do you know the 3 planes of motion, and would you be confident if I threw out at you some really tricky questions about which one we're training in? I'd like to know Y or N below. I want to see if I get more yeses or more no's in terms of your comfort level with the different types of planes of motion. Because if I get more yeses, I'm going to get more high level. If I get more no's, I'm going to bring you guys up to where I want you to be first. And there's no shame in a no, right? So I want you guys to let me know, how comfortable are you with the planes? Let's say 1 is you're not comfortable at all. You've never heard of planes of movement. 5 is I am an absolute planes of movement ninja and you don't need to give me any information. Just start spitting programming knowledge. I want to know where you guys are at. 1 is you know absolutely nothing about planes of motion and you need me to tell you. 5 is you don't want me to say a word about the planes. Let me see where you're at. Start giving me some information down there. 5, I like it. Wow, we fit. Wow, we fit. That's bold. That's bold. DJ Peter's giving me a 3. What else we got, guys? There's 20 of you in here right now. I want to see where you're at. Mal Carmel, a 4. Lumber City CrossFit. Okay. AMXS. Not really. A 2. Okay. Guys, this is fine. I want to know. I'm not judging you on what you know. The goal of these talks is to bring you up. Listen, Wowie Fit, I'm not saying you don't know it. I'm not saying that, that you don't know. I'm just saying I've talked to doctors who are a little bit in the dark on what plane of movement they're working in. All right, so I'm seeing that we kind of have a mix of people in here. Some people are fairly comfortable. Some people are less comfortable, so that's fine. I'm going to get right into what the planes are, and we'll move from there. If you guys have questions about what I'm saying, feel free to just ask, hey, I didn't fully catch that. Could you explain it? Just drop it right in there. Didn't catch that. When I see that come in the comments, I will go further into the planes. So we have 3 planes of movement. Okay, the first plane of movement is the sagittal plane. Sagittal plane happens right here, right? So anytime that a joint flexes or extends, it is happening in the sagittal plane. So this would be a sagittal plane movement. Push-ups with my arms close to my body is primarily a sagittal plane movement. Ring dips are a sagittal plane movement. Understand, all movements happen in various planes at the same time. Most movements do, I should say. I don't want to ever say all. But we're going to be talking about the primary right now. So the movements I just described, for example, a good morning is a great example of a almost purely sagittal plane movement. A squat is mostly sagittal plane. So again, anything where joints are flexing and extending is going to be happening in the sagittal plane for that joint. And that's the thing that people get confused with a lot, is planes are joint contingent, right? So the sagittal, if I bring my arm out to the side like this and do bicep curls, even though my arm is technically functioning in what's called the frontal plane, and we'll get into that in a second, my elbow doesn't know where my shoulder is. So my elbow is still operating in the sagittal plane, okay? So the sagittal plane, like we said, front to back, flexion, extension, that's the easiest way to think about it. The frontal plane is going to happen here. Right? Imagine there was a wall in front of your face and a wall behind your head, and it went all the way down to your feet. Anything you could do in that space would be considered a frontal plane movement. Lateral raises, high pulls, shoulder presses out to the side. In some cases, depending on how you do them, your handstand push-ups, right? Side shuffles. monster band walks. All of that kind of stuff is going to be happening in the frontal plane. So remember now, right? It's as the joint knows it. So if I turn my arm out, this is now technically, I could do this in the, this is a frontal plane movement if you want to get really, really down to the nitty gritty with me, what I just said, if you want to dive into the words. But as far as my elbow knows, nothing has changed. So my elbow is still functioning in the sagittal plane, even though the movement is occurring in a place that could be considered the frontal plane. I hope I'm not confusing you guys going too deep in the woods. But like I said, if you have any questions, just say, I didn't understand that, and I'll get right to it with you. The transverse plane is the third plane. That's the one where all rotation and anti-rotational movements are going to happen. This is where we throw a ball. This is where we do a Pallof press, right? This is where we do Turkish get-ups for the most part. The transverse plane is the plane in which we are going to produce the most external force on an object violently and aggressively in a throwing motion. Right, so yes, you can hinge, and that's going to be, you're going to deadlift more than you can throw. But a throw is a dynamic movement that always happens in the transverse plane. So a really good example to kind of mess you guys up is if I was to do a push-up like this. Arms out to the side. What plane is that occurring in? I'd like you guys to tell me, based on the information I just gave you, which plane that's occurring in. Is that sagittal plane, front to back? Is that frontal plane, side to side? Is this transverse plane, rotational? Larry, the active intern, thinks it's transverse. What do other people think that is? What do you guys think that is? And there's no shaming for getting the answer wrong, but there's no learning if you don't write anything. So we have a sagittal plane guess. I'm looking for more. Because of how the arm lives relative to the torso. Okay, we got another sagittal. We have all. So the answer is always going to be all planes, or almost always going to be all planes. So I want you guys to focus on the plane that's most used. Okay, so we're getting a lot of sagittal. And the reason why we're getting a lot of sagittal, guys, is because you're looking at my torso. And yes, my torso is moving in a front to back direction. But what's the joint that we're actually evaluating here? We're evaluating the shoulder. And the shoulder is occurring in a rotational direction, right? I didn't say like this. This kind of a push-up would be sagittal, but I specifically said a push-up out over here, right? Like a chest fly with bent elbows. Even though your torso stays in the sagittal plane, technically, the shoulder is the joint that we're talking about the function of, and that is occurring in the transverse plane. This is the level of knowledge I want you guys to have for these types of movements, so that when I discuss with you how to get out of the sagittal plane, you understand what I'm talking about, as opposed to me just saying something and you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, right? So don't feel bad if you wrote sagittal. It's mostly a transverse movement. Larry, the active intern, asks, even if the arms were tucked, wouldn't the rotation of the shoulder make it transverse? If the arms were tucked, it would become more of a flexion extension exercise, Larry, than it would a rotational exercise. So the primary with elbows sliding against the body would actually be a sagittal plane movement for the shoulders, because it's flexion extension. 1 second, I'm going to turn off the washer dryer. I'll be right back. So, any questions, guys, about why a push-up occurs in the transverse plane when the elbows come out to the side? Because it's really important. I saw some of you guys who wrote sagittal, who also wrote that you were a 4 or a 5 on the way that you felt like you were confident in the way that movement happens through various planes. So you should have a question. And it's okay if you got that one wrong or if you disagree with me. Both of those things are okay. But a push-up with the elbows going out to the side, this kind of a push-up occurs in the transverse plane as far as the primary mover of that lift is concerned, which is the shoulder, because they're going through rotational movement. It's essentially a big chest fly with the elbows bent. These things here are the same The only difference is the elbows for one are bent, the elbows for the other are flexed. Guess was just thinking more per joint. So Wowie Fit, this is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of nuance of planes of motion, right? The primary joint that's functioning here is the shoulder. The elbow, yes, the elbow would still be a sagittal plane movement. If we're talking about what's going on at the elbow, that's going to be sagittal because it's flexion and extension, right? It doesn't matter where it is in space. The elbow is still moving through flexion extension as far as it knows. That's the only plane the elbow can really function in. The shoulder has opportunities for others, right? So as far as the elbow is concerned in this movement, it's happening in the sagittal plane. As far as the shoulder is concerned, it's happening in the transverse plane. Now, I want you guys to start extrapolating that out, right? A squat is primarily what? A good form, no modification necessary. As far as the hips are concerned, what is the primary plane of motion for a squat? Quiz time. Drop it in there. Is it the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, or the transverse plane? Yes, it occurs in multiple. I'm not saying it occurs in one. I want to know where you think the primary plane of motion as far as the hips are concerned is. We have one vote for sagittal. What else do we have out there? As far as the body, frontal, sagittal, frontal. Okay. I'm going to wait for two more. Sagittal. Waiting for one more. I want one more vote. Sagittal. Okay, I got enough votes to give you the answer. The answer is a squat as far as the hips are concerned is primarily going to be occurring in the sagittal plane. It is a sagittal plane movement. The primary functions of the hips in a squat are flexion and extension. Yes, there is some external rotation. Yes, there is some abduction forces. But the primary test of a squat is, can we go into deep hip flexion and come all the way through to hip extension? So a squat occurs in the sagittal plane. Great. Some of you guys got that right. Some of you guys got that wrong. That doesn't matter. You're all learning something now. That's the point, right? So now let's talk about another movement. What if I was to show you a pull-up where your elbows came down like this? So a lat pull down kind of a pull-up, or a strict pull-up on a pull-up bar where your elbows were out to the side, came into your ribs, went back up, came back down. We're not talking about kipping pull-ups. We're not talking about close grip pull-ups. Hands are out to the side, elbows go up, elbows come down. What plane is that mostly happening in? Is that the sagittal, the frontal, or the transverse? Remember, as far as the shoulders are concerned, we're talking about the shoulders, not the elbows. The elbows are almost always going to occur in the sagittal plane. Good. I'm seeing the right answer put up there a lot. The answer to this is the frontal plane, right? Because remember, it doesn't matter if the elbows bend or not. If I was to do a lateral fly, this is the same thing as far as the shoulder is concerned in terms of planes of movement as a lateral raise. So great. A pull-up with a wide grip where the elbows come into the side is considered a frontal plane movement primarily. A push-up where the elbows come out like this is going to be a transverse plane movement primarily, because we're looking at the shoulders. And a squat is primarily a sagittal plane movement because it's hip flexion, hip extension, knee flexion, knee extension. Great. So when we look at what most of the time happens in a training session in a CrossFit gym, I'm not talking about personal training in a Globo gym, I'm not talking about sport-specific training. Most of the movements that we see occur in what's called the sagittal plane, right? Most of the time people are doing burpees with their arms next to their body. We're doing ring dips. We're doing muscle ups, which are all happening through here. We're doing pull-ups where they look like this, right? Yes, there's some rotation. Yes, there's some frontal plane, but really the primary movement for all these things happens in the sagittal plane, right? A clean. Yes, this part of it is frontal plane, but then it's straight back into the sagittal, down and up. Cleans, snatches, deadlifts, there are components of them that occur outside of the sagittal plane, but for the most part, they are sagittal plane lifts. Okay? So, that being, the shoulders I will give you though, however, when we look at cleans and snatches when done correctly, shoulders should be here, which would be a frontal plane movement for the shoulders. But as far as the rest of the body goes, they're going to be sagittal plane movements. So when I say we need to get more movement in your program that's outside of the sagittal plane, I'm not just talking about movements that are obviously outside the sagittal plane. I'm talking about movements that resist moving outside the sagittal plane as well. So what am I talking about? I want you guys to take, for example, a single arm farmer's carry. You grab a heavy farmer's handle, you take it for a walk. What plane is that primarily occurring in? You take a heavy farmer's handle, you go for a walk. What is the plane that you guys think that is mostly happening in? This is the hard one. You're walking straight forward with a farmer's handle. Larry says the frontal plane. What else we got? The sagittal plane. Okay, what else we got? Frontal plane, okay. Transverse plane, all right, good. So this is going to be an answer that you guys are going to be, yeah, good question, Wowie Fit. What joint, right? So if I said to you guys the hips, it's going to be resistance to the frontal plane, action in the sagittal plane, right? Because I'm carrying that weight. I'm trying to avoid falling over. So my hips are fighting to keep me upright, especially the hip on the same side as the weight. My torso is fighting to keep me away, right? Although I do not want you leaning away. So those, it's a frontal plane movement for. For my shoulder, it's a frontal plane movement, right? Because my shoulder just wants to fall in like this, and I'm trying to keep it off the body just a little bit. But the primary movement of the hips is going to be sagittal because they're still moving front and back. They're resisting lateral. The primary movement of the torso and the shoulder are going to be frontal, right? It's a very diverse movement. It's a great thing for you guys to build in as a way to build multiplanar movement, getting you out of the sagittal plane while still fighting to maintain sagittal plane position. Most of your training should happen in the sagittal plane, because that's where we live most often. So it's okay that most of your training lives there. Let's talk about another movement. We talk about high pulls, single arm high pulls all the time. This is a frontal plane movement, right? Because my elbow is going out to the side. So it's not really shoulder flexion as much as it's shoulder abduction. Great movement for you guys to be doing for your shoulders in the frontal plane. Here's one that I want you guys to think about. This is going to be a little bit more difficult. Payloft presses, right? So if I grab a band, a payloft press is going to look like this. I'm going to step back for a second. I'm standing this way. I have a band hooked up to a rig over here, to a rig over here to my side. Or there's a pulley system, right? I'm in a Globo gym. I take my band from here and I pull it. And now I'm going to hold it here. Hold it. Relax. Press it up. Hold it. As far as my torso is concerned, which plane is that occurring in mostly? As far as my torso is concerned. Boom. Perfect, guys. The transverse plane. The reason why that's a transverse plane movement is if I just let my body go, holding that band out, it would just swing in that direction. Right? So a payloft press is a great way to build transverse plane movement into your programming. So Turkish get-ups, phenomenal multiplanar movement. That's why they beat the crap out of people. Right? Lightweight Turkish get-ups, one of my favorite movements. So I like it heavy too. I'm just talking about Turkish get-ups in general, one of my favorite movements. But if you do lightweight for a lot of reps in a class setting, you're going to crush people. And you're not going to beat up their joints. So here's the kind of the magic pill, right? How often should you be training in these other planes as compared to what you're doing on a regular basis? And the answer to that is really going to be it's up to you. It's an art form. But I like to make sure that for every single movement that I do in the sagittal plane, I get one in that at least has a component that is primary of a non-sagittal plane movement. So what that means is I'm essentially 2-to-1 sagittal to transverse and sagittal to frontal, but I'm 1-to-1 sagittal to everything else. Does that make sense, guys? And it's hard to do. I don't always maintain that. But I would consider running, for example, a multiplanar movement. So sprints are multiplanar, farmers carries are multiplanar, one-arm shoulder presses are multiplanar, snatches are multiplanar, cleans are multiplanar for the shoulders, right? I'm going to be doing lateral sled drags. I'm going to be doing side shuffles. I'm going to be doing single leg deadlifts, lateral box step-ups, regular box step-ups. A regular box step-up is very evidently a sagittal plane movement, but when you think about your opportunity to fall to the left, your opportunity to fall to the right, your opportunity to rotate, it becomes a very strong movement to resist various planes. So for me, the answer is for every one time I build a sagittal plane movement into my program, I also want to build one movement that is not. That's it. So it's 2-to-1 sagittal to transverse, 2-to-1 sagittal to frontal, 1-to-1 sagittal to everything else. Hope that's helpful for you guys. Do you have any questions for me regarding how you can do this or what you're currently doing or anything about what's going on with you tonight? If you don't, I'm going to go ahead and throw this up on our Facebook page via our YouTube page. Remember, performancecarerx.com is where you can find everything you're looking for. Our YouTube page is on there, our Facebook page is on there, our programming is on there, our podcast is on there, which I would really appreciate if you guys went and rated, by the way. Subscribe and rate, subscribe, rate, subscribe, and rate. Yeah, I got nothing else. I'll give you guys a second for your questions. Continual tight lats. That's a state of being. That's not a question. Are you asking what to do about it? Because I don't know. I don't know if they're underused. I don't know if they're overused. And it's going to depend on, the answer to that is going to describe how we get them better. You've been on performance care. Are you on Bulletproof Shoulders, Wowie Fit? Or are you just generally doing our suggestions via the messaging on here? What else we got? And Wowie Fit, by the way, if you're not getting what you want out of our Bulletproof programs, that's when an enhanced assessment or one-on-one work helps a lot. The question comes through, how would you train the throw movement in the gym? Every time I throw, my shoulders are in pain. I would not train the throw movement in the gym. I think that you're talking about throwing a ball based on the way you described your symptomology, and I wouldn't. I would train that with a ball outside the gym, and I would get my lower body ready so I can be in appropriate positions throughout my throw. A lot of people who injure their shoulder, their elbow, throwing, and then go on rehab programs to strengthen their shoulder and their elbow, they're missing the big picture. It's not a shoulder and elbow problem oftentimes. It's an arm slot problem. And that arm slot can become problematic because your hips, your legs aren't getting you in the right position to throw. So I would go full body, take a look at the whole thing. Looking for a good warm-up for the knee after a tendinitis. A good warm-up for the knee is a good warm-up for the knee no matter what you're coming off of. You need to figure out why you had tendinitis in the first place as opposed to just trying to warm up and avoid it in the future. Why do you think you got it in the first place? Our basic assessment can go a long way in helping you with that. You can find our basic assessment at performancecarerx.com. If you take that test, it will tell you what you need to do to avoid the tendinitis again. Hold Rayer, how much is Bulletproof Shoulders per month? A Bulletproof membership is $39 a month, and it gives you access to multiple plans at the same time. So $39 a month is the short answer to what you're looking for. And it's worth 5 times that, especially if you use the closed group on Facebook and ask every single question that you have, because every single question gets answered. And then it's like having a one-on-one coach. You just have to wait a little longer for your response. M. Talipova, one of my favorites on here, always on. I appreciate that. Knees keep cracking and popping during squats. No pain. Don't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it so much, but it is something to consider, right? If it starts to become symptomatic, the cracking and the popping is a sign that things aren't moving exactly how they should. So you don't need to worry about it urgently, but you do need to consider it and start considering why it's happening. And we can talk about that June 29th and 30th when you come to our workshop. We'll find out a lot about you there. Hold Ray, you're planning to join is great, and I appreciate that you're planning to join, but I plan to do a lot of things that never happen. So I would stop planning and start doing. Any other questions, guys? Podcast, the last one with Pat Barber went an hour and a half because I couldn't stop talking to him. I would have gone for 3 hours, but I had to cut it. You should listen. You'll enjoy it. If you guys got nothing else, I'm going to wrap it up. So, as always, it's fun. It's real. I'll never BS you guys. Head to performancecarerx.com. Find everything that you want and need from us. And we'll talk soon, guys. Thanks for coming out.